That morning was quiet. The first light of day spilled through the curtains, falling onto the kitchen counter where the ghost of coffee still lingered. My phone vibrated. The screen lit up. A text from my mother. "Family helps family, Clara. Your father needs $3,000 for Tyler." No greeting, no check-in. Just a demand disguised as affection, cold and familiar as the morning dew outside my window, as if I owed them my entire existence. I didn't know then that my simple tap on the "Don't Send" button would actually open up a whole new journey. From that small, sunlit kitchen that day, to the night the door was pounded, the police standing on my porch with blue and red lights flashing across my walls, to the cold, bright courtroom where my father said, "I just want my daughter to be safe," and the judge replied, his voice calm and steady, "Restraining order granted, 4 years." I remember sitting still, my hand resting on my chest, and for the very first time, clearly hearing my own heartbeat, steady, firm, and free. This is my story. The story of a daughter who was once terrified of the sound of a key turning in a lock, and who finally learned how to keep the key to her own life. If you want to know how this story ends, stay with me. And don't forget to subscribe, to walk with me through true stories so real, you might just find yourself in them. The morning was blurry with fog, the sky a sheet of washed-out, milky gray. On the kitchen counter, my phone gave a quiet buzz. A message from my mother appeared. "Family helps family, Clara. Your father needs $3,000 for Tyler." There was no "hello, darling," no "how are you." It was just a demand disguised as affection, written as though I owed them my entire existence. I stared at the words, waiting a few seconds, as if the phone might delete the message on its own if I was patient enough. But it stayed there, stark, indifferent. Part of me wanted to type, "Okay, Mom," because that's how things had always gone. But this morning, for some reason, my hand wouldn't move. At the table, Leo was cutting colored paper. His face was serious, the scissor blades moving slowly, as if measuring every thread of time. He looked up and smiled. "Mom, are they coming to my birthday?" My son's voice was as light as a whisper, but his innocent eyes hit right at the old wound, the place where I still kept the quiet waiting from when I was just another good child in their house. I swallowed lightly, trying to keep my voice normal. "Absolutely." The word came out fragile and weak, my voice trembling so slightly I barely recognized it as my own. Leo smiled, went back to cutting paper, sticking more stars onto his drawing. I watched him, thinking of all the years I had tried to believe that if I was just obedient enough, if I sacrificed just enough, they would love me more. But real love doesn't come from obligation. It has to be a choice. The light in the kitchen shifted color, turning from pale gold to gray. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. I put the phone down on the counter, still not knowing if I would reply or stay silent. I just knew that this morning something felt different inside me, as if a door somewhere had just quietly shifted. The kitchen light bulb flickered, the light constantly twitching like a nervous heartbeat. I looked up. The light reflected on the window glass, creating shaky streaks of light, exactly the feeling I still carried inside whenever my mother texted me. From the smallest things, they always made me feel indebted. A sum of money, an apology, a silence at the right time. I used to think that was love, but now I just felt exhausted. On the counter, the phone remained lit. The words, "Family helps family," felt like thin slices being cut into my memory. I heard Leo's laugh, the snip-snip sound of the scissors, and in the middle of those sounds, there was a silent space, as if the world was waiting for me to make a choice. I reached out my hand and placed the phone face down. A small click echoed, tiny, yet enough to change the atmosphere of the entire room. A small sound, really, but to me, it was like a steel door closing behind me. After all those years of living in fear, I had never dared to do this one simple thing, to refuse. Just one ordinary action, but it closed the door on years of enduring. I sat still. The flickering light paused a few more times, then stabilized. It was strange. When I stopped being afraid, everything around me seemed to stop trembling, too. Leo looked up. "Mom, can I stick some more clouds on it?" "Of course," I smiled, pulling my sweater closer around my shoulders. My voice sounded different, lighter, no longer shaking. A part of me had just melted away, the emotional fog of all those years of needing permission to breathe. I looked at my son, and I understood. If I didn't stop this, he would grow up in the exact same kind of silence. I stood up and walked to the sink. The water flowed in a steady stream. On the surface of the water, the yellow overhead light swayed. I saw my face reflected, tired but alive. It had been years since I realized my true face didn't always have to be smiling. Outside, the wind sighed softly. A branch brushed against the window pane, making a steady, rhythmic sound. I looked out at the sky, the clouds thick and low, but far in the distance, I could still see a thin sliver of light, like a thread. I didn't know if it was enough to pull me out of the shadows, but I wanted to believe it was. On the counter, the phone remained silent. No notification, no vibration. I lightly touched it just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. Then I let go, like releasing something that had been weighing heavily on my chest. I took a deep breath. No, I'm not sending the money anymore. The sentence came out naturally, without needing practice. I spoke softly, but every word carried weight, like stones dropping onto a pond, creating ripples that spread outward. For a moment, I felt my breath truly return. It went deep into my lungs, reaching the area in my chest that had been compressed for so long. I took a cloth and wiped the counter, my fingers tracing a small scratch on the wood surface. Last year, Leo spilled milk and kept apologizing for it. I told him, "It's okay, everything can be wiped clean." Now I understood that it wasn't just the counter, it was me. I could also be wiped clean, if only I dared to begin. Leo ran over, holding up the paper. "I finished it, Mom." The drawing showed a house with an open doorway, two people standing side by side. No grandparents, no Tyler, just me and him. The sky in the drawing was a bright blue, a color I had never dared to choose myself. I knelt down and hugged him. The smell of his child's hair, soap and sunshine, made my heart slow down. "Mom?" Leo whispered. "Can I put this picture in the dining room, so anyone who comes into our house can see it?" I nodded. "Of course." As Leo ran off to grab the tape, I looked at the phone one last time. Still face down, still silent. I knew that soon my mother would call. Maybe her voice would tremble and she would say, "You're ungrateful." But I also knew that this time I wouldn't pick up. Not because of anger, but because I finally understood. If I keep opening the door to people who hurt me, then freedom is just an empty word. I turned the dimmer on the kitchen light. The light softened, round and peaceful. In my mind, I could still hear that tiny click when I put the phone down. That sound, which no one heard but me, it would stay with me forever. As a reminder, freedom, sometimes, only needs to begin with daring not to answer. I can still clearly remember those evenings in the old Salem house. Low ceilings, damp-smelling wooden walls, and the clock hanging in the living room that was always 2 minutes slow. When I was little, my father always said, "Family first." He would say it at every dinner, his voice steady and resonant, as if reciting scripture. But even then I understood. It meant Dad first. Whenever he uttered that phrase, Mom would fall silent, offering a strained smile. Tyler would nod, chewing quickly to appear dutiful, and I would just look down, counting every single time my spoon hit the plate. Later, I realized, some sentences people speak are not meant to remind you, but to assert power. Family first, in my house, meant never go against my father's will. I was 12 when he lost his job. From that day on, the house became frighteningly quiet. Dad started taping bills onto the refrigerator, crossing out every number with a red pen, as if punishing someone. The electricity, the water, the gas, even my milk. He would sit for hours with the old computer, tracking every single cent, then sighing loudly, just so everyone could hear. If I kept my study lamp on for too long, he would knock on the door. "Do you know where the money comes from, Clara?" I would apologize. It was always, "I'm sorry." Once, I left the faucet dripping. He made me stand there and watch until the very last drop fell. Then he said, "Hear that? Every drip is money going down the drain." I nodded, trying not to cry. In my head, I counted. 1, 2, 3. Each drop of water felt like a measure of my own heartbeat's worth. My mother was perpetually silent, as if her silence alone could keep the house from collapsing. Whenever he yelled, she would only say, "Don't make your father angry." Her voice was soft, gentle, but every time I heard it, I felt myself shrinking a little more. That phrase was like an incantation meant to reassure against all mistakes, except it never saved anyone. I learned to anticipate his anger, learned to clear the table quickly, turn off the lights at the exact right moment, and laugh in the right places. Every action I took felt like a test, and the score was never quite enough. Tyler was different. My brother could forget to lock the door, spill milk, or lie about school, and Dad would just smile. "He's a boy. Let him learn responsibility." But me? If I just spoke louder than usual, he would frown. Is that how a girl talks? Every night, Mom would check the lock on the door, then look at me and whisper, "Go to sleep, Clara. Everything will be fine." But I knew she was saying it to lull herself. Years later, sitting alone in my small Portland kitchen, I could still hear that phrase ringing back, "Don't make your father angry." My mother's voice, a blend of fear and fierce loyalty, two things I carried with me for far too long. One time, Leo spilled water on the floor. I instinctively started to yell, then stopped mid-sentence. I saw the image of my 12-year-old self, standing there watching the water drip, too afraid to even breathe. I knelt down, smiling. "It's okay, buddy. It's just water." Leo looked at me, surprised, then smiled back. "I can clean it up, Mom." His simple statement hit me. It turned out the smallest thing, normality, was what took me years to finally allow myself to have. I looked up, seeing the overhead light reflecting in the glass of water. The light was golden, steady, no longer flickering. I suddenly thought, perhaps that was the difference between the old house and this kitchen. One place was controlled by fear. The other was learning to breathe again through love. And in that breath, I knew I was no longer the good daughter they wanted me to be. Since I was a child, I had learned to ask permission for every decision, even the smallest things. If I wanted to go somewhere, I had to ask. If I wanted to eat seconds, I had to ask. Even when I wanted to buy a new shirt, I had to wait for my father's nod. I remember an afternoon when I was 16, standing in front of the mirror in a clearance store. A turquoise wool sweater hung right at eye level. Not expensive, only $12, but I knew it would be dismissed as frivolous. I texted my mother, "Can I buy this shirt?" 10 minutes later, she replied, "Don't upset your father." I folded the shirt, put it back exactly where I found it, and left. When I stepped outside, it was snowing lightly. I pulled the collar of my old coat up, feeling the cold sharp in my throat. I didn't realize then that every time I asked permission, I was cutting off a piece of my own voice.
Tyler was different. My brother was spoiled and forgiven. If he wanted something, Mom always said, "He's a boy." A short sentence, but enough to open every door, to erase every mistake. He could borrow money from Dad and forget to repay it. He could drive all night, call home the next morning, and still be greeted with a hot breakfast. Me? If I was 10 minutes late, Dad would be waiting at the door, arms crossed, his eyes cold as glass. "Where do you think you've been, Clara?" "I was helping a friend with homework." "Which friend? You're a girl. You shouldn't be wandering around late at night." I bit my lip and nodded. "Yes, sir." I always said yes, sir, to everything. I didn't understand then that the goodness they taught wasn't virtue. It was a tool to keep me controlled. A daughter who was afraid, who was silent, who knew how to please others. A good daughter in their eyes, but a shadow in her own life. As I grew older, I carried that habit into every relationship. Before making a decision, I would think, will the other person be angry? Before saying no, I would ask myself, is this my fault? And every time I heard my father's voice in my head, family first. I heard it so often, it merged with my own heartbeat. It wasn't until I had Leo that I started to hear the emptiness in those familiar sounds. One night, after he was asleep, I sat in the dark, watching the nightlight cycle through yellow and orange. I asked myself, if my parents walked in right now, would I dare to say no? The answer was no, and that realization terrified me. I realized I had been raised on fear, and I was starting to raise my own son on the same thing, only softer, more subtle. Whenever Leo made a mistake, I heard my mother's voice in my head. Don't make your father angry. I had to swallow it down, like taking a bitter medicine to detoxify myself. I started keeping a journal, just a few short lines every night. At first, it was just recording normal things. Leo loves pancakes. It's raining. But then, slowly, other sentences appeared. People don't need permission to be happy. Silence is not a virtue. Enough. It was the first time I had heard my own voice again, weak but real. Sometimes, reading it back, I found it funny. A woman in her 30s having to relearn how to say, I want. But perhaps that was the only lesson I had never been taught. Now, when I think about my childhood, I don't feel anger anymore. I only feel regret. Regret for that little girl who constantly sought approval to be loved. Regret for my own mother, who was never taught that loving a child also means letting them be free. I grew up so obedient that I forgot my own voice. That thought still echoes in my mind every time I see Leo smile. And I know, I have to learn how to use that voice again, not just for me, but for my son, too. I found out I was pregnant on a February afternoon. Outside, a thin snow was falling, flakes quietly settling on the windowsill, as if the world was whispering something only I was meant to hear. I looked at the test in my hand. 2 red lines, clear and trembling. In that moment, I was both terrified and strangely centered, as if my whole life had been waiting for something that would force me to start over. I called my mother first. She paused for a moment, then spoke softly. Clara, have you told your father? I replied, not yet. I thought I should wait. That evening, Dad came home. I waited for him to finish eating and put his bowl down. Then I said, I have something to tell you. He didn't look up. Have you paid the tuition yet? Yes, sir, but it's not about that. I'm pregnant. There was no reaction for the first few seconds. Then he lifted his head, his eyes so cold I felt like I was standing in front of an open winter window. He spoke slowly, enunciating every word. You made your bed, you lie in it. I don't know what I was expecting, but certainly not that. I thought he would rage, or at least ask, who is the father? But no, just one short sentence, severing everything between us. Mom stood by the sink, head bowed, her voice shaking. Don't make him upset. I looked at her, unable to speak. I only saw her thin shoulders, her wet hands,
and the way she deliberately avoided looking at me. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be utterly alone, even among the people of your own blood. That night, I went out and walked for miles. The snow fell thicker. The streetlights glittered on the wet road like 1,000 pieces of broken glass. I heard my footsteps sinking into the snow, each one a soft, heavy sound, as if every step was an unanswered question. I returned to my small apartment, turned on the heater, and sat on the floor. I thought about the baby. It was formless yet, but it made me feel like something inside me desperately wanted to live. In the months that followed, I still occasionally received texts from Mom. No questions, just short lines. Are you working? Or, don't let your father down. Dad remained silent, as if I had ceased to exist. They didn't visit, didn't ask for the due date, didn't send a single small gift. Then came the day Leo was born. I went through labor alone. The pain lasted 13 hours, set against the beeping of the heart monitor and the wind howling outside the hospital window. When the nurse placed the baby on my chest, he opened his eyes, honey-colored, round and clear, as if they had never known hurt. I cried, not from the pain, but from the realization that I was still whole after everything. I wanted to call Mom, just to say, I'm okay. But then I thought, what would they say? Family first? Or, you've upset your father again. I turned off my phone. A week later, while changing Leo's diaper, Naomi sent me a screenshot. I looked, and my heart seized up. A picture of Leo, taken from my mother's own Facebook account. The caption read, "A family miracle." No hospital visit, not a single phone call. Yet they could take a picture of my son, the baby they had never held, to tell a perfect story for others to see. I stared at the picture for a long time. Leo lying in a white blanket, eyes closed, peaceful as an angel. A miracle, they called it. But I knew that fake miracles always came with a price. The price of trust, of affection, of things you could never get back. I turned off the phone, pulling my baby tight against my chest. His breath was warm, smelling of milk and newly washed flannel. I whispered, "You won't grow up on empty words like I did, okay?" Leo didn't understand, just stirred slightly. But to me, it was a true promise, the first one I didn't need anyone's permission to make. I sat there, looking at the picture on the screen for a long time. The picture Mom posted, the baby in the white blanket, the caption, "A family miracle." My finger brushed across my son's cheek. His skin was still soft as dew, his tiny lips pursed, unaware that his first image presented to the world was a lie wrapped in kinship. I wasn't angry, not truly. The feeling was more like standing in front of an old burned-out house with nothing left to save, just emptiness, as if a part of my memory had just gone completely blank. I locked my phone and leaned my head back against the chair. Outside, a light rain fell, the drops tracing paths down the window pane as if someone was writing and erasing the same story. I listened to Leo's soft breathing in his crib, steady as a clock. In the small room, only that breath made me believe that anything real still existed in this world. One morning a few weeks later, the phone lit up again, a text from Mom. No hello, no how is the baby, just one short line. Tyler needs to borrow some money. Help your brother out, he's family. I stared at the screen, stunned. That name, Tyler, still felt like a pair of scissors cutting through my memory. My brother, the one who was always forgiven. The one Dad used to say, "He'll amount to something, he just needs more chances." Those chances were the money I sent, month after month, just to avoid making my mother uncomfortable. I got up and walked to the window. It was still raining. The raindrops slid down in steady lines, slowly dripping. I counted to 10 and then stopped. I realized I was still doing the same thing, counting, waiting, enduring. I opened the message, typed a few words, then deleted them. Typed again, deleted again. The letters blurred, as if the keyboard itself understood my hesitation. In my mind, I heard my mother's voice. Help your brother, he's family. I wanted to ask back, what is family, Mom? Is it something that flows in your veins and automatically turns into debt, into obligation, into silence? Or is it just a reason for someone to hold you back until you have no strength left to break free? Why is blood thinner than water? The question flashed through my mind, sharp as a knife, but I wasn't brave enough to say it out loud. I sat down, my hands clasped together. The rain outside was steady like a distant heartbeat. I remembered all the times Tyler promised to pay me back, and never did. Dad said, he just needs more time. Mom said, he's a man, he has setbacks. Me? No one defended me. No one apologized for me. I just sent the money, stayed silent, and told myself, at least I still have family. Now I wasn't so sure. If kinship only survives on bank transfers, will it die when I stop sending them? Or did it die long ago, leaving only a shell to keep people from being ashamed? I placed the phone down on the table, hearing that faint click again. A familiar sound, small but heavy. Last time, that sound was the start of a new boundary. Today, it felt like the final punctuation mark on an old memory. Leo whimpered softly. I picked him up, soothing him with whispers. Shh, it's okay, baby. He burrowed his head into my shoulder, warm, alive, real. The smell of milk and his tiny, nascent breath calmed me. I whispered softly, almost only to myself, you will grow up differently than your mother. You won't have to apologize for existing. Outside, the rain stopped. On the table, the first light after the storm shone on the glass of water, clear, still. I looked at it, then at the sun in my arms. For the first time, I felt my heart lighten, though I wasn't strong enough yet to say everything out loud. But I knew. This silence was no longer fear. It was the quiet ground for a voice that was forming, little by little, inside me. This morning, the kitchen smelled of chocolate. I was smoothing the final layer of frosting onto the cake, listening to the soft pop-pop of balloons settling in the living room. Leo was giggling, a clear, innocent laugh that made me want to cup my hands and hold on to it forever. On the wall, I'd taped up a happy birthday banner made of shimmering gold paper. LED lights blinked, reflecting on the window glass, wrapping the entire room in a warm, fragile glow. It was Leo's 6th birthday. I wanted him to have it all. Cake, balloons, bright lights, and joy unmarred by harsh words. I placed extra chairs around the table. Plates and forks were already laid out. The last 2 chairs were for his grandparents. Even though every cell in my body knew the truth, I did it anyway. It was a remnant of an old ritual, like habitually lighting candles even when you no longer believe in the wish. By 2 o'clock, I looked at the clock. The 2 chairs were still empty. 3 o'clock, still silence. No call, no text. Just the soft children's music playing from the Bluetooth speaker and the smell of cooling cake. Leo sat by the window, his legs swinging, holding a gift he had drawn himself. A blue piece of paper marked with heavy pencil lines depicting a bicycle for Grandpa. Mom, he said, his voice quiet as the wind. I drew this for Grandpa. I'll give it to him when he comes. I managed to smile, walking closer. That's a beautiful bike. He's going to love it. He nodded, then looked out at the street, the road leading to our house, still empty. I sat down next to him, watching the light reflect on the window glass. We were both silent, only our breathing blending with the distant sound of birds chirping. My heart tightened, not because they hadn't shown up, but because this little boy still believed that people kept their promises. I remembered all the times I had sat waiting just like this, waiting for my dad to come home for dinner, waiting for a hug, waiting for a "I'm sorry" that never materialized. Looking at my son now, it was like looking at my younger self, small and loyal to expired hope. I was about to speak, but Leo turned to me. "Mom, maybe they're just late, right?" I nodded, offering a gentle smile. "Yeah, maybe." But inside, the true answer was already starkly clear. 3:30. The golden light of the afternoon began to fade to a honey color. The chocolate cake still had its candles. I lit them. The small flames trembled in the room full of balloons. Leo clapped his hands. "Sing, Mom!" I sang. Alone. My voice mingled with the sputtering of the candles, in the faint light, in a determined effort at joy that no one but the two of us could hear. I looked around. The chairs were still empty, the balloons still hung, but the room no longer felt as sad as before. Maybe it was because I understood. Not every promise needs to be kept for us to move on. Sometimes, just having someone stay and smile is enough. Leo kissed my cheek, leaving a smear of frosting. "Mom, what should I wish for?" I stroked his hair and answered, "Wish that you never have to wait for anyone else to be happy." The late afternoon sun slanted across the wooden floor. The balloons were deflating slightly, the cake cooling to a pale, creamy color. Leo still sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the street in front of the house, where no car pulled over. "Are they here yet, Mom?" His voice was quiet, but it was like a needle piercing through the composure I was trying so hard to maintain. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice sounding perfectly natural. "They must be stuck in traffic." The words came out with frightening ease. I was lying with the same language my mother had once used to shield her own disappointment, but Leo just nodded without questioning. He turned back to the cake, picked up a spoon, scooped a small bite, and said, "We can eat it now, right? We'll light the candles again when they arrive." I nodded. "Yes."
Go ahead.
He smiled, his cheeks smeared with chocolate cream, oblivious to what it felt like to be abandoned. I looked at him, feeling both tenderness and fear. Fear that one day, as he grew up, he too would learn to comfort himself with such gentle lies. The evening passed slowly. The candles burned down, leaving only thin smoke hovering in the room. I cleared the table, hearing the spoon tap against the plates, a monotonous, repetitive sound, echoing in the long silence. Outside the window it was completely dark. The streetlights came on, their cold glow falling on the porch. Leo sat in the corner, adding a few more strokes to his afternoon drawing. The bicycle now had training wheels and a small red heart on the frame. I walked over and sat down beside him. "That's beautiful," I said. "Did you add the heart?" "Yes." He looked at me, his eyes clear. "So Grandpa knows I love him?" I smiled. "I'm sure he will." But in my heart I knew, sometimes, love isn't enough to make someone turn back. When I tucked Leo into bed, he was unusually quiet. I pulled up the blanket, adjusted his pillow, and just as I thought he was asleep, his small voice whispered, "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" I froze. That simple question almost made me crumble. I sat down and pulled him into my arms. His tiny warmth pressed against my chest, soft, real, and painful. "No, sweetie. The mistake is with the grown-ups." I spoke slowly, each word dropping from a very deep place. Leo wrapped his arms around my neck, whispering, "I'm not mad at them." I laughed through tears. "Me neither. I'm just tired." The room was immersed in the amber glow of the nightlight. Outside, the wind gently tapped against the window. I sat still, listening to his breathing smooth out, then gently rested my hand on his soft hair. In my mind, old memories flooded back. The waiting, the empty promises, the meals where the only sound was a spoon tapping against porcelain.
I used to think that if I just tried a little harder,
things would change. But the truth is, some people only know how to love the way they were taught, and sometimes that way isn't enough to keep anyone around. I took a deep breath, looking at the amber light shining on the wall where our two shadows overlapped, small but clear. Perhaps that was the image of the family I'd always longed for. Not perfect, not complete, but true. I kissed his forehead. Good night, Leo. He smiled in his sleep, his lips moving slightly as if saying something. I didn't hear it, but I felt my heart lighten, as if the unnecessary things were dissolving with the breath of the night. Outside, the rain had stopped. I looked through the window frame. The sky was a smooth black, dotted with a few scattered stars. No one came. No call, no text. But I knew that tonight I had stopped waiting, and perhaps that was the real birthday gift, not just for him, but for myself.
3 days after Leo's birthday, when the balloons had sagged and half the cake was still in the fridge, my phone lit up again. The sender's name was clear: Dad. I didn't open it immediately. An old premonition pulled me back, as if every character inside still carried the cold dampness of the house from years ago. I took a deep breath and swiped to unlock. The message was short, sharp as a blade. Family comes first. Tyler needs $3,000. I know you have it. No greeting, no asking, how is my grandson? Just a voice of entitlement wrapped in the familiar veneer of morality. It was the same old line, the mantra that had bound me for so many years. I stood still in the kitchen, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. On the counter, my coffee mug was cold. 3 days ago, Leo had lit his candles, smiled, and made a wish. Today, that birthday had been replaced by a demand for money. I sat down and opened my banking app. My finger trembled slightly on the screen, not because I didn't have the money, but because I knew if I complied, I would be right back where I had fought so hard to escape. I felt my heart pound, and my hand grew cold. The numbers appeared. 3,000.00. I deleted it. 1.00. A number so small it was ridiculous, but it was what grounded me. I typed a note in the memo field. All the best. A sentence as light as air, just polite enough, just cold enough. I reread it and gave a small, solitary laugh, not out of glee, but because for the first time in years I felt I had a genuine choice. I recalled all the times before, the same texts, the short phone calls, the warnings, don't let your father down. Every time I had obeyed, I had grown used to the feeling of sending money as a way to smother a fire, quick, quiet, so the house could have peace. But quiet isn't peace. It's just conditional silence. Now, looking at the words, all the best, in the memo field, it felt like a small farewell, gentle but final. A way to say no without having to scream. Leo walked in, his hands still smeared with crayon wax. "Mom, can I watch cartoons now?" "Yes, but only one episode." "Okay." He ran off, giggling. I watched him go, thinking of those $3,000, the price they thought could buy back the right to be wrong. But I had learned, money doesn't fix anything. It only extends the silence a little longer. I pressed send. The screen turned white. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then the message appeared. $1 sent successfully. I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who has just laid the first brick to rebuild herself. I stared at the screen for a long time. That tiny number, $1, was lit up against the white background, ridiculously fragile. A part of me wanted to delete it,
retype 3,000, and send it off to keep the peace, to ease my mother's mind, to quiet my father's sighs, to silence the guilt they had skillfully sewn into my mind like a curse. I was too used to it, trading my self-respect for false tranquility, sending money to buy silence, sending money to temporarily avoid becoming the unfilial daughter, sending money to purchase a few more days without being named in condemnation. I put my finger near the delete button. The screen displayed clear amount. Just one tap. One tap, and I would be back to who I was. Obedient, agreeable, compliant. Then Leo's laughter echoed from the living room. Clear, natural. That laughter sliced through the heavy silence in my head, pulling me back to reality. I turned to look. My son was wearing a paper hat, holding a crayon, adding streaks of blue to the drawing taped to the wall. In it were two people, one big, one small, hand in hand, against a sunlit sky. No one else. No grandparents, no Uncle Tyler, just us. I felt my heart sink, then lighten. Suddenly, everything became so clear that I didn't need to think about it anymore. If I sent 3,000, I wouldn't just be repaying them. I would be teaching my son that love can be purchased, that kindness means surrender, that being good means staying silent. No, I didn't want Leo to learn that. I didn't want those clear eyes of his to one day look at me the way I used to look at my mother, with affection, with confusion, and with fear. I placed the phone back on the counter. My fingers were still trembling, but now it was because I was about to do something new, something I had feared my entire life. I looked at the number one last time, then touched the send button. Confirmed. The screen flashed gently. A first tap made not out of fear, but out of freedom. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. My heart was racing, but I didn't feel panic. Instead, I distinctly heard the blood rushing through my body, the sound of being alive, real, and strong. Memories flooded my mind, the times I stood in the old kitchen hearing Dad yell, "Mom, stay silent," and only daring to whisper, "Yes." The years I thought silence was gentleness and endurance was filial piety. All of it felt like it was being extracted, thread by thread, growing lighter, thinner, and then dissolving. I opened my eyes and looked around the kitchen. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the counter, where the phone lay, silent and harmless. A simple thing had just happened, but I knew I would remember it forever. From the living room, Leo ran in. "Mom, I finished the drawing!" I bent down. The picture now had a scribbled line of text. "Home is here." I smiled. "That's right, son. Home is here." Leo hugged my neck, his laugh as bright as the sunlight on the porch. I turned back to look at the phone screen. No reply yet. No angry texts. Not yet. But I was no longer waiting. I no longer needed them to understand. I only needed myself, right now, to know that some things have a price, and some values should never be for sale. Outside the door, the wind gently swayed the white curtain. The light passed through it, faded, and then brightened again, like a steady breath. I sat still, listening to my heart beat in my chest, steady and firm. Freedom isn't loud. It's just a small moment when a woman presses the send button and for the first time in her life knows she has kept the most valuable thing, herself. I used to think that when I left my parents' house, I was truly free, but I wasn't. The house I was living in was still co-signed with my father, an invisible thread, thin but strong enough to constrict every decision I made. I discovered it one early spring afternoon. The bank sent an updated mortgage statement. White paper, black ink, the names clearly printed, Frank Bennett and Clara Bennett. I stared at the paper, my hand freezing. It felt like someone had knocked on the door of my memory, reminding me that sometimes chains aren't forged of iron, but of signatures. I brewed a cup of tea and sat looking at those names for a long time. I had tried to leave everything behind: the old house, the cold dinners, my father's voice, steady and hard as metal. Yet somewhere he still held the right to interfere with the place I called home. That evening, after Leo was asleep, I opened my laptop and searched Portland Housing Law Consultation. The list that appeared was long, like a corridor. I randomly chose a name: Gregory Miller, an attorney specializing in individual ownership rights in family disputes. That phrase stopped me. Family disputes. It sounded like people needed the law to protect themselves from their own blood. 3 days later, I was in his office. The room was small, white-walled, the air mixing the scent of paper and coffee. Gregory was about 50, salt and pepper hair, his voice calm and composed. He looked over my file, then lifted his gaze. "May I ask," he said, "why you still have your father's name on the deed?" I managed a small, strangled laugh, my voice catching in my throat. Because that way, things were quieter. He felt he had control, and I was less harassed. Gregory nodded, his finger tapping gently on the desk surface. A long silence ensued. Not uncomfortable, just enough for me to clearly hear the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, he spoke. "You can be the sole owner." I looked at him, not sure I'd heard him right. He added, slowly, emphasizing every word, "And you should be." The room suddenly fell silent. Those 3 short words echoed in my mind like a latch clicking into place. Not closing, but opening. Opening toward a direction I had never dared to look. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window glass, seeing the tree branches swaying in the afternoon light. A single leaf fell to the sidewalk, as light as the decision I didn't yet have the courage to voice. Gregory pushed the file toward me, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it today. Just think about it. Sometimes freedom doesn't require running. It just requires stopping in the right place." I nodded. I said nothing more. The paper remained in front of me, and the pen stayed quiet in his hand. But inside me, a thought had just awakened, clear and quiet as the sound of rain on the eaves outside the window. I knew, soon, I would be back. 6 months later, I returned to Gregory's office. The Portland sky was a pale gray, the fine rain misting the air, leaving thin streaks on the car window. On the seat beside me, the envelope containing the refinancing papers lay still, as if it knew that today, everything was about to change. Gregory greeted me with a slight smile, polite but warm. "You seem calmer than last time." I nodded. Perhaps because this time, I know exactly what I'm doing. We sat facing each other. He held out the paper, turning each page, his voice steady. "Just sign here and here. Once complete, the house will be entirely in your name." I took the pen. The tip skimmed the paper, making a faint scratching sound. Scritch, scritch. A fragile noise that echoed in my head like a heartbeat. When the final stroke closed, Gregory gathered the file and pressed the red seal. The stamp hit the paper, round and sharp, like a definitive final period. I sat still, holding the file in my hands, feeling the trembling laughter, not from fear, but because something huge was fracturing within me. The papers weren't heavy, but my hands felt like they were lifting an entire piece of my past, the past of a girl who had lived by everyone else's permission. I looked at my name printed boldly on the file cover. No one beside it. No Frank Bennett. Only one single name. Clara Bennett. I heard myself laugh softly, and tears followed, falling onto the paper, creating a faint, blurred smudge. The tears weren't from sorrow. They were what was left after someone had walked too long in the dark and finally touched the light, even if only with their fingertip. Gregory looked at me and smiled. "How does it feel?" I replied, my voice still shaking, "Like cutting off an invisible handcuff." He nodded, silent. No more words were needed. I stood up and left the office. Outside, the rain was still falling lightly. I opened my umbrella and walked slowly along the wet sidewalk. Cars drove past, splashing water, but I didn't flinch. Each step was lighter, as if the weight around my chest was being removed layer by layer. When I got home, Leo was lying on the sofa watching cartoons, his feet propped up, humming softly. I stood at the doorway for a long moment, listening to his laughter blend with the rain on the porch. The house suddenly had a different smell, the scent of breath, of stillness, of something no one could ever take away. I placed the file on the table. The lamplight shone on the paper, reflecting the letters of my name. It was beautiful, simple, and required no one's approval. I sat down and whispered aloud, not needing anyone to hear. "I've never known freedom to be so fragile." A sentence without an exclamation mark, because freedom for me isn't a shout. It is a slow breath, the soft scritch of paper, the feeling that my hand no longer trembles from fear, but trembles because it has touched its own life. Outside, the rain began to stop. The first light after the shower streamed through the window frame, painting a pale gold stripe on the wall. I looked at it for a long time, feeling as if a new room had just opened up inside me. Spacious, quiet, and full of air. Perhaps freedom is never solid. It is always delicate, like newborn skin, sensitive, easily hurt, but real with every breath. And that is what makes it so precious. The morning was cool and clear, the air carrying the scent of metal and wind. Naomi brought over a screwdriver set and a handful of gleaming screws in a small plastic container. She set them on the table, offering a wry half-smile. "Ready?" I swallowed hard. "I guess so," I said, even though my heart was pounding as if I were about to step onto a strange stage. We stood before the old wooden door. The lock was worn, rusty around the edges, the exact one my father had installed. For years, it had been a symbol of security in his eyes, and a symbol of terror in mine. I remembered countless times hearing the key turn outside, my stomach twisting, barely able to breathe while waiting to see what new wave of anger would follow. Today, I was going to replace it. It was such a small thing, unscrewing the old, installing the new, but for me, it felt like ripping a piece of the past right off the wall. Naomi looked at me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "If you don't want to, I can do it." I shook my head. "No, let me." I took the screwdriver. I had never been so afraid of the sound of metal. With every turn, the metal rang out, dry and final, echoing in the empty house like my own footsteps moving forward. Click, click. The first two sounds rang out, small but distinct. Each twist felt like tightening my own courage. I heard my heartbeat merge with that turning rhythm, tense, shaking, then settling down. Naomi stayed silent, just watching. In the morning light spilling through the window, metallic dust floated gently, shimmering like golden ash. I bit my lip and took out the final screw. The old lock fell into my palm, colder and heavier than I remembered. I turned it over, looking at the deep black keyhole, hollow, just like I used to feel whenever I tried to open up to people who would never truly listen. I set it aside. Naomi handed me the new lock, the steel still bright and untarnished. "It looks just like the old one," she said. "No," I shook my head. "It doesn't look like it at all." I began installing the new lock. My hand was no longer shaking, just moving with a steady rhythm. Click, click, click. Each sound felt like a confirmation that this was my house, that no one else could step inside unless I allowed them. Naomi stood behind me, smiling softly. "I guess this is the cheapest form of therapy you've ever tried." I chuckled, my breath clouding slightly in the cool air. "And probably the most effective." Outside, the overnight rain still clung to the steps, reflecting tiny, mirror-like spots of light. I glanced at the doorframe, dark wood, slightly cracked at the corner. It used to be the boundary between "they can enter" and "they don't have the key anymore." One final screw tightened. I tested the handle, smooth and secure. No creaking, no scraping, no shadow waiting outside. Naomi nodded. "Done." I smiled, my hand still resting on the doorknob, listening to that final little click resonate in my heart. Definitive, the sound of a new chapter. Naomi sat down on the steps, leaning back against the wall. She looked at me, then at the new lock, her voice small and genuine. "If it were my father, I don't think I could have done it." I turned, seeing her eyes were slightly moist. I understood. She too had grown up in a house with rules that no one dared to question. That fear doesn't disappear when you grow up. It just learns to change its clothes, look more reasonable, and stay longer than you expect. I sat down next to Naomi, still gripping the screwdriver. I couldn't have done it either, if it wasn't for my son. The words came out softly, like a sigh, but I heard the absolute truth in them. Leo was the reason I got up every morning, worked, laughed, and today changed the lock. I used to think he needed me to grow up. Now I realize I needed him to become myself. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us saying anything more. The wind rustled through the pine trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and rustling leaves. The door behind me was different now. The same shape, the same wood, but it was being closed by my own hand, not by anyone else's authority. Naomi reached out and gently tapped my shoulder. "Well, it's done. Your dad won't be able to get in anymore." I nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, and I won't be afraid of him walking in anymore either." She smiled, but her eyes were still distant. Funny, right? How something so small can change everything. I looked at the new lock, the metal gleaming in the sun, and said, "Sometimes freedom has no shape. It just has a sound." I took out my phone and raised it to take a picture. The morning light reflected through the glass, casting a glow on the door, shining directly onto the new lock. I adjusted the angle slightly and clicked. The picture was saved. Bright metal, dark wood background. Simple. I sent it to myself, then watched the delivered notification pop up. In the memo, I wrote, "This is what freedom sounds like." I don't know who I sent it to. Maybe to the woman I used to be, who was always waiting by the door, waiting for a voice to say, "You did something wrong." Perhaps to my own mother, who never dared to change her own lock. Or to anyone living in the fear they call love. Naomi stood up, dusting off her hands. "I have to go. Are you okay?" I smiled. More than I thought I would be. She walked toward the gate, waved, her figure getting smaller on the street lined with yellow leaves. I stayed, leaning against the wall, looking up at the door. The sun shone diagonally, falling onto the metal surface, reflecting like a soft breath. Everything was silent, but it was a new kind of silence, no longer heavy, no longer expectant. I opened my phone one last time, looked at the lock picture, and set it as my wallpaper. An ordinary picture, nothing special, but to me, it was proof that I did it. That the click today was no longer the sound of someone walking in, but the sound of me closing the past. I took a deep breath, resting my head against the door. The wood felt cool against the back of my neck, but my heart warmed with every beat. Freedom sometimes doesn't start with running anywhere. It starts with daring to stand still and changing your own lock. That morning began with the smell of coffee and Leo's laughter. The sun was soft, the air quiet, as if the house itself was breathing with me. I was making breakfast when the knocking started, insistent, heavy, and urgent. The sound wasn't like a visitor. It was the frantic drumming of an old memory, familiar and terrifying. I froze. Leo looked up from the dining table and asked, "Mom, who is it?" "This early? It's probably just a delivery driver," I said, trying to keep my voice even. But my heart was already racing as I walked toward the door. I looked through the small peephole and saw 3 faces: Dad, Mom, and Tyler. My breath caught. My hand stayed on the deadbolt, cold and stiff. In that instant, every sound in the house seemed to vanish. All I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears, hot and heavy. My father, Frank Bennett, stood on the porch, his coat unbuttoned, his eyes blazing like an untamed fire. My mother stood behind him, clutching her purse to her chest, her lips moving as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Tyler, my brother, was looking down at his phone, appearing indifferent, like someone waiting for a taxi, not someone pounding on his sister's door. Frank inserted his key into the lock. I distinctly heard the clink of metal. He twisted it once, then twisted it again. Nothing. I stood perfectly still, without moving. Part of me wanted to back away, wanted to hide, but the other part, the part that had just learned to stand up, whispered, "Don't. Stay put." Frank twisted the key one more time, harder. The lock remained silent. He looked up, his eyes blazing with fury, and slammed his fist against the door. Bam! 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 The house shuddered with every impact. "What have you done with my lock?" His voice boomed, full of righteous indignation. I heard every word, like stones hitting my chest. I took a deep breath, pressing my forehead against the wood. Through the thin layer of wood, I could visualize his face, his cold gray eyes, his tight brow, his clenched jaw. I had grown up with that expression, the look that made anyone feel wrong, even if they had done nothing at all. Inside, Leo called from the dining table. "Mom, should I open the door?" "No, sweetie, keep eating." My voice was surprisingly soft, calm. Maybe because for the first time I truly understood. This fear no longer had the power to control me. I looked through the peephole again. Frank was still hitting the door. My mother turned to him, gripping his sleeve, saying something. I could read her lips. "Stop it, Frank." But he shook her hand off. I felt my own hand tighten around the deadbolt, not to open it, but to make sure it stayed locked. The morning light streamed through the doorframe, falling onto the wooden floor, touching my hand. I realized I was shaking, but not from fear. It was my body learning a new habit, confrontation. I heard Frank's voice boom again, even angrier. "Are you trying to humiliate me? This is my house. Do you understand that?" The words hurled at me, one after another. Before, I would have apologized. Before, I would have opened the door, bowed my head, and said it was a misunderstanding. But today, I was no longer the old me. I placed my hand flat against the wood, whispering softly, just loud enough for myself to hear, "No, Dad, not anymore." Outside, the wind began to pick up. A dry leaf slid across the doorframe, fluttered in the light, and vanished. Inside, the house stood still, solid, small, and belonging to me. I stood before the door for a long time. The pounding slowly weakened, leaving only his heavy breathing penetrating the wood. Outside, the rain began to fall, heavy, even drops, tapping on the porch roof like a ticking clock counting down. I knew I couldn't hide forever, not because he had the right, but because I no longer wanted to be afraid. I reached up and slid the top bolt open. The door cracked open, just a narrow gap, enough for the light to seep in. The security chain held firm between us. I looked through the opening. Frank froze when he saw my face behind the safety chain. My mother stood behind him, her eyes red, her lips trembling. Tyler pretended to examine his shoes, as if this whole scene had nothing to do with him. I kept my voice level, steady, not raised. "It's my house, Dad." The air was thick. I could feel his breath on the space between us, heavy, hot, and full of outrage. He threw back his head, yelling, his voice echoing through the rain. "Family comes first!" Those 4 words, "family comes first," I had heard my entire life, like an incantation he used to justify every action: control, insult, imposition. The phrase that used to make me crumble, that made Mom cry, that got Tyler forgiven no matter what he did. But today, it carried no weight. It was just an empty sound, sliding off the wood and dissolving into the rain. I took a deep breath, looking straight at him. My voice was low, but so clear that every word seemed to strike the cold air between us. "No, Dad. Respect comes first." The sentence came out light as a breath, yet it sounded like thunder in my own heart. Frank's face flushed red. He tried to speak, then choked. His gaze dropped to the gleaming silver chain under the rain, a small but decisive boundary, the thing I once thought I would never be brave enough to put up. Behind him, Mom whispered, "Frank, stop it." But he didn't turn around. He just stared at me for a long time, as if searching for the old, obedient daughter somewhere in my eyes. She was gone. I added, my voice calm, "You can stand outside for as long as you like, but this door is no longer open to anyone who brings fear." He clenched his fist. The rain fell harder, hitting his shoulder, the porch steps, and the chain between us. In that moment, I didn't feel weaker. I felt equal. A man who once taught me fear was standing before a door I chose not to open. Tyler glanced at me, muttering, "Come on, Dad, let's go." He turned away without a word. Mom looked at me, her eyes full of tears, her lips trembling. I gave a slight nod. No anger, no smile. I just wanted her to know I'm okay. As they walked away, I closed the door. The chain rattled softly, click. It was a small sound, but it felt like the entire house let out a breath. I leaned back against the door, my heart pounding, my breathing ragged. The rain still fell on the porch, drumming against the roof like a wordless piece of music. Leo ran out from the living room. "Mom, who was it?" I knelt down, wrapped him in a hug, and smiled. "No one important, sweetie." I kissed his hair, taking a deep breath. The smell of milk, child soap, and rain. Peaceful, innocent, real enough to make me cry. I looked up at the door, where the chain had just been closed. It gleamed under the kitchen light, small, yet distinct. Perhaps that is the shape of freedom. Not loud, not grand, just a boundary strong enough so we no longer have to be afraid. I thought everything was over after that morning. But that evening, just as the porch light flickered on, I heard the wail of a police siren, blue and red flashing, piercing through the curtain. I stepped onto the porch. My heart wasn't racing as fast as it used to, but it was beating with a different, alert kind of rhythm. Vigilance. By the gate, 2 police officers were speaking with my father. A flashlight beam cut across the lawn, reflecting against the house wall, blurring everything into a pale glare. Frank pointed toward me, his voice loud. "This house is mine. My daughter is illegally occupying my property." I bit my lip. The statement sounded so familiarly ridiculous, as if he were reading from the same old script, except today, I wasn't playing the supporting role anymore. One of the officers, the younger one, his silver badge catching the light, turned and asked, "Ma'am, could you step out for a moment?" I opened the door and stood right on the threshold. The blue and red lights flashed rhythmically against the wall, striking my face in stripes. The cold wind carried the smell of wet plastic and car exhaust. I heard Leo call from inside, "Mom, what's going on?" "It's okay, honey. Go back to your room." My voice sounded normal, as if I were talking about a rain shower that was about to pass. The older officer asked, "He claims the house is in his name. Do you have any papers?" I didn't answer right away. I turned back inside, walked to the cabinet drawer where I kept the refinancing file. The papers were still tucked inside a hardcover, right next to Leo's birthday photo. When I touched them, I felt something warm in the palm of my hand. Not fear, but clarity. I walked back out and placed the file on the small table in front of them. "Here," I said, "all the ownership documents, the most recent version." The round red seal was clear and bright, gleaming under the officer's flashlight. He leaned down to examine it closely, flipping through a few pages, the light tracking the lines of text. When he reached the page with my name, he stopped. I saw a small reflection in his eyes, the confirmation. Frank still stood beside him, his voice harsh. "She forced me to sign the papers. I can prove—" The officer raised a hand, signaling silence. He spoke slowly, clearly, every word sounding like a verdict. "Ms. Bennett is the sole legal owner of this home." The air fell into a vacuum. I could distinctly hear the rain dripping from the porch, the distant sound of a car passing on the street, and my mother's breathing, staccato, fragile as a thread. Frank fell silent. The anger in his eyes was extinguished, leaving a cold, empty space behind. I felt no triumph, no win, only stillness, a rare quiet, like the house had finally taken my side. The younger officer returned the file, nodding slightly. "I apologize for the disturbance. We were just following procedure. Everything is clear." I nodded. "Thank you." I watched them turn and walk away, the patrol light slowly fading around the corner. In that moment, I saw the blue and red lights still reflecting on the wet pavement, vibrant but receding, like the years I had lived in fear. Frank still stood motionless by the gate, his shoulders slightly slumped. My mother gently touched his arm, saying nothing. I didn't step out. I simply closed the door, softly, just enough for the faint click to ring out, small, firm, and final. Frank went utterly still. He stood suspended between the blue and red light reflecting on the pavement, the rain covering his hair, streaming down his collar. For the first time in my life, I saw my father silent. Not the kind of silence meant to intimidate, or the calm before a storm, but an empty silence, as if he had just lost something he believed he would possess forever. My mother stood behind him, her hands tightly clutching her purse straps, her eyes fixed on me. Her gaze trembled like an oil lamp in the wind. Her lips moved, and I read her silent words. "I'm sorry." But no sound escaped. I felt a lump in my throat, not from pity, but from the realization that some apologies come too late, when the person speaking no longer has the courage to hear the words, "I forgive you." I gave a faint nod, a quiet answer. She understood, and tears rolled down her cheeks, mingling with the rain. Tyler stood next to her, looking down, pretending to scroll through his phone. His finger traced meaningless patterns on the dark screen. There were no notifications. He dared not look at me, nor did he look at his father. He just stood there, caught between two worlds, the world where he chose silence to save himself. I remembered when Tyler got bad grades as a child, and Dad would yell at me instead of him. If the daughter doesn't set a good example, how can she teach her little brother? I had stood in front of the mirror, biting my lip until it bled, thinking that if I was just better, everything would be fine. And Tyler just bowed his head, silent, just as he was today. A piece of metal hit the ground, dry, sharp, echoing. I looked down. Frank had just thrown the old key. It tumbled a few times on the concrete, hit the porch step, and lay still. The streetlight shone on it, reflecting off the wet metal, cold and lifeless. The scene unfolded strangely slowly. The entire space condensed around that small object, the last symbol of control, of the past, of fear. Now it was just a piece of rusty iron, abandoned on the wet ground. Frank turned away without another word. His shadow merged with the rain, heavy and straight as a streak of ink. My mother followed, walking slowly, occasionally turning back, as if wanting to say something, then deciding against it. Tyler tucked his phone into his pocket, silently trailing behind. I stood on the porch, holding the now dry file. No one looked back, and I didn't call them to return. As their car turned the corner, the red taillights slowly fading, I bent down and picked up the key. It was ice cold, heavier than I expected. I turned it over in my hand, my thumb running over the worn iron teeth. This key was once a symbol of kinship, of trust, of family first. Now it was just meaningless metal. I opened my palm and let it fall into the small wooden box in the corner of the porch, where I kept things that had lost their value, but were once part of me. The drop was soft, yet it echoed clearly in my heart. Click. Leo ran out, his hair messy, clutching his teddy bear. "Mom, who threw something out there?" I knelt down and stroked his hair. "Just an old key, honey. It doesn't open this door anymore." He nodded, not asking for more details. I picked him up and closed the door. The door creaked softly, then settled. The house was submerged in the warm light, the smell of tea, and the breath of two people, my son and me. I looked out onto the porch one last time. The old key lay in the wooden box, reflecting a weak light from the hallway lamp. It had no power left. It was merely a piece of evidence of what I had just reclaimed, the right to live in peace, in a home that carried only my name. I whispered softly, like a farewell. "Thank you for falling at the right time." Outside, the rain gradually stopped. A soft breeze blew through, stirring the curtain, and for the first time, I felt the house truly breathe, with the warmth of freedom, and no one holding the key. 2 days later, just as the peace settled back into the house, the phone rang. An unfamiliar woman's voice, polite and cautious. "Hello, Ms. Bennett. I'm calling from CPS. We've received a report alleging child neglect. We need to conduct a home check." I froze, the kitchen towel still clutched in my hand. For the first few seconds, I couldn't speak. All I heard was the drip of water from the kitchen faucet and the rapid pounding of my heart. The silence was thick, suffocating. Then I took a deep breath, gripping the phone tightly. "You said neglect? Who made this report?" "We are not permitted to disclose the identity of the complainant," she replied, her tone even, as if reading from a script. But I knew instantly who had done it. Frank. Only he would know the exact way to inflict fear without needing to touch me. He no longer had the key, no longer had legal control, but he could still find another path, through accusation. I sank onto a chair, my shoulders trembling slightly. Leo was drawing in the living room, innocent, as if this world contained nothing bad. I looked at him, then at the phone in my hand, a tiny object capable of making the entire house shake. "Okay," I said into the receiver. "You can come. I will be home." I hung up, exhaling, my eyes stinging. I wasn't crying, but a chill crept through me. The old fear returned, the fear of being defined by others, of being forced to justify my own life. I texted Naomi. "CPS is coming today. Someone reported me for neglecting Leo." Less than 5 minutes later, she called back. "Frank?" "Yes." "Of course." Her voice was dry, then softened. "I'll be right over." 15 minutes later, Naomi arrived. She asked no further questions, just rolled up her sleeves, grabbed a cloth from the cabinet, and started wiping. "We don't have to be perfect," she said. "We just have to be real." I nodded, starting to clean the house with her. We organized toys, folded blankets, scrubbed countertops. The air was filled with the scent of lemon and warm wood. I wiped away every streak of dust on the shelves, as if cleaning off the layer of suspicion someone had tried to smear across my life. Naomi looked around and said quietly, "You know, sometimes they don't need real proof. They just need to scare you." I offered a small, raspy laugh. "I've lived my whole life in fear, Naomi. Today, I refuse to be afraid anymore." Leo ran out, his hands stained with crayon. "Mom, who is coming?" "Just someone to visit, sweetie." "Should I clean up my toys?" I smiled. "Yes, help Mom out. And remember, when they ask, just tell the truth." Naomi knelt beside Leo, her voice gentle yet firm. "Buddy, when people ask you what you like, what do you say?" Leo thought for a moment, then answered, clear and confident, "I like the pancakes Mom makes." Naomi laughed. "Perfect." My small house felt strangely bright then, not because of the lights, but because of the atmosphere, clean, warm, and genuine. On the dining table, a stack of pancakes just off the pan steamed sweetly. I brought the plate over, setting it in the middle of the table, and said softly, "We don't have to prove anything. We just have to live as ourselves." Naomi looked at me and nodded. "Exactly. Freedom is sometimes just being trusted that you are innocent." I looked around. Everything was tidy, warm, Leo's clear laughter echoing in the room. And in that moment, I realized, no one can truly diminish you unless you bow your head again. And today, I wouldn't bow. A knock came, 3 times, soft and polite. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The CPS worker was a woman with short hair, wearing a beige jacket, her voice soft and professional. "Hello, Miss Bennett. I'm just here to verify a few things." I invited her in, maintaining a natural tone. "Yes, please come in. My son and I are just getting ready for dinner." The afternoon light streamed through the window, casting an amber glow on the wooden floor.
Leo was sitting at the table, busy coloring. When he saw the stranger, he looked up, polite. "Hello." The woman smiled. "Hello to you. What's your name?"
"Leo Bennett. I'm 6 years old. I like the pancakes Mom makes the best in the whole world."
She let out a soft laugh. "Is that so? Maybe I can ask for one later?" Leo nodded, as excited as if he'd been complimented. I watched the scene, feeling the tension lift from my shoulders. It wasn't that everything was fine, but the house was speaking for me. The woman opened her notepad, looking around. The refrigerator was stocked. Fruit, milk, cold cuts, several yogurts Leo liked. She took quick notes, her eyes softening. "The kitchen is clean and warm," she said. "That's something rare in these kinds of checks." I offered a small smile. Maybe because this is a real home, not a crime scene. We walked through the living room, then to Leo's neat bedroom. The blanket was folded, the teddy bears lined up on the bed. On the nightstand, a framed photo of Leo and me by a lake. The golden light filtering through the window illuminated the boy's face in the photo with a bright smile. The woman paused, looked at me, her gaze shifting from suspicion to empathy. "Miss Bennet, I ask this only to complete the record. Has anyone been harassing you recently?" I looked her straight in the eye, my voice steady. "Yes, but they don't have the key anymore." A faint smile touched her lips. "I see," she said, closing her notebook. We walked back to the living room. Naomi poured her a cup of ginger tea. The aroma filled the room. The inspection finished sooner than I expected. Before leaving, the woman turned and said, "Someone may be trying to cause trouble, but everything here is fine. You don't need to worry. We will state that clearly in our report." The door closed, leaving only the sound of the wind outside. I leaned back against the wall, breathing a long sigh of relief. Naomi walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "See? Nothing to hide." I nodded, smiling. Nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Leo ran out, holding a half-eaten plate of pancakes. "Mom, can I finish these?" "Go ahead, son. She said Mom's pancakes are the best, remember?" He smiled, picked up a piece, and ate while humming softly. I looked around the house. The light, the laughter, the smell of cake, the scent of tea. No sign of guilt, only life. A week later, the official report arrived in my mailbox. I opened it, my hand slightly shaking, not from worry, but from the memory of opening mail that once brought threat, not relief. White paper, blue seal, the bold conclusion: malicious, unsubstantiated report. I read it over and over. A short, concise sentence that closed a whole chapter of fear. I placed the paper on the table and poured myself a cup of tea. Outside, the late afternoon sun spread across the floor, the golden light touching the edge of the table like a velvet ribbon. Leo was singing softly in his room. Naomi was shaking out a cloth on the porch. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Everything was strangely quiet. Quiet in a way that required no defense, no proof. I whispered softly, almost to myself. In the end, they couldn't rewrite the truth when I was still living it. Outside the door, the wind chime sang, soft, clear, and utterly free. That morning, Portland was draped in a light rain. On the way to lawyer Vanessa Hart's office, my car wipers swept rhythmically, like a breath trying to maintain composure. I had been to court, met the police, and proven everything. But today was different. Today, I was here to draw a line. Vanessa's office was on the second floor of a red brick building, next to a small cafe smelling of caramel. I pushed the door open. A wind chime jingled softly. The receptionist smiled, pointing toward an office at the end of the hall. The door opened, and Vanessa looked up. She was in her early 40s, with a neat haircut and a calm, deep voice. Her eyes weren't sharp, but profound. The kind of look that had seen many lives shattered and knew how to piece them back together without many words. "Ms. Bennet?" "Yes." "Please sit down." I sat, my hands clasped together. On her desk was a thick stack of files, every corner marked with colored tabs. On the wall hung a framed photo, Vanessa standing next to a group of women, all smiling, some holding small children. I realized the smiles in that picture belonged to those who had escaped. Vanessa opened a new file, speaking slowly. "You've taken all the right steps. The ownership documents, the
the CPS report, the police records. It's all clear. I nodded, my voice husky. But I still can't sleep. I'm afraid they'll come back, or just stand outside the gate. She looked up, watching me intently, then said, "You don't need to prove you are a victim. You only need to prove you have had enough." I fell silent. That sentence was like a soft cut, quiet but deep. Not everyone understands what having enough means. It's when you hold your breath every time the doorbell rings. It's when your son asks, "Mom, is Grandpa coming today?" It's when you forget what your voice sounds like when it isn't shaking. Vanessa slid a form toward me. This is a petition for a temporary restraining order. If approved, they cannot come near you within 300 feet. No calls, no text, no showing up. She spoke slowly, each word placed on the desk with its own weight. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Clara. Let the law be the door instead of the lock." I looked at the paper. My name was clearly printed at the top, the letters small but sharp. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from a different sensation. I was redrawing my own boundary. Vanessa offered the pen. "Are you ready to sign?" I took the pen, my fingertips cold. A moment of hesitation flashed. Signing meant admitting I had been harmed, but not signing meant I would live in fear forever. I took a deep breath. The pen touched the paper, shaking slightly, but the handwriting was clear. Each stroke was round, straight, and decisive, as if every line of ink was a cut between the old and the new. Vanessa nodded, smiling. "Good, that's it." I put the pen down, the warmth of the ink still in my palm. In my head, I heard a faint click, not of a door lock this time, but the sound of the bolt closing on an old chapter. I looked up, staring out the window. The rain was still falling, but the light filtering through the glass was no longer gray. It was as if the sky had just noticed a woman was learning to protect herself. Vanessa reviewed the signature, then looked straight into my eyes. Her voice was low and firm. "You are doing the right thing for yourself and for Leo." Hearing her say that, I unconsciously clenched my hands, not from fear, but from realizing I had just done something the old version of me never would have dared. I was no longer the woman waiting for others' permission to find peace. I chose it myself, and in that choice, for the first time, I felt no guilt. Vanessa gathered the files, placing them into a hard binder. "The office will file this immediately. When the temporary order is approved, you should receive notification within 2 days." I nodded, thanking her. She stood up and shook my hand, the grip warm and genuine. "I meet many women like you," she said. "Some come here crying, some are silent, but they all share one thing. They thought they were weak, until they had no choice but to be strong." I smiled and softly replied, "Perhaps strength isn't innate. It's what happens when you run out of choices to retreat." Vanessa nodded, understanding better than anyone. 2 days later, exactly 48 hours as she had said, I received a call from the district office. The court clerk's voice rang through the line. "Ms. Bennett's temporary restraining order has been approved. It is effective immediately." I stood still, my coffee cup still steaming in my hand. Outside the window, the rain had just stopped, and the sky looked as if it had been wiped clean. I looked at the document sent via email. Bold, neat, clear text. Restraining order. Temporary. I read it over and over, every word seeming to glow. Must not approach within 300 feet. Must not contact. Must not delegate. Cold administrative words, but to me, it was the shortest poem about freedom. I printed it out, placed it in a small frame on my desk right next to Leo's photo. He was smiling, his eyes innocent, unaware of the silent battles his mother had to fight to keep that smile intact. Naomi stopped by and saw the paper. "Congratulations," she said. "From now on, he can't touch your life anymore." I nodded. Not just him, the part of my life I used to let him control. She smiled. "Now that's the real restraining order." We sat drinking tea, saying nothing more. Only the light from the window streamed in, soft, golden, and quiet. The jasmine tea scent spread through the room, dissolving into the warmth of the afternoon. That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. Not the sleep of someone running away, but of someone who has successfully built the wall in the right place. I turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs. Leo was sound asleep, his breathing even, his small arm clutching his teddy bear. I pulled his blanket up, kissed his forehead softly. The hallway light was warm and golden, shining through the door crack, casting an amber stripe on the floor. I lay down, distinctly hearing my heart slow down. No more knocking, no more fear of a shadow by the gate. Only silence, the luxury I once thought I would never afford. In the dark, I closed my eyes, thinking of the tiny click every time I locked the door. Now it was no longer the sound of anxiety. It was the sound of my heart closing off fear and opening up to peace. For the first time in this very house, I truly slept as a free person. The morning at the Multnomah County Courthouse had its own distinct light, cold and sterile, like the air in an emergency room. The wooden seats, the polished floors, the sound of lawyers' and clerks' shoes echoing steadily like a ticking clock. I sat in the second row, my hands clasped, my back straight, yet I still felt a coldness creep up my spine. Above, the national seal hung on the wall, glistening in the light that poured through the tall windows, a light that warmed no one, but simply illuminated everything. Vanessa sat beside me, her thick file tabbed with colored markers. Each color represented a piece of a life that had been dissected, reorganized, and was now assembled as evidence. She leaned in, speaking quietly, her voice calm like someone who had navigated 100 similar hearings. "You just need to sit still. I will speak for you." I nodded, swallowing the sharp ache in my chest. Across the room, Frank stood with his own lawyer. He wore a gray suit, his tie tightly knotted, his hair neatly combed, as if that could somehow make him appear right. When the judge entered the room, everyone stood. The sound of chairs moving simultaneously, wood scraping against the floor, was dry, short, and sharp. The judge was a middle-aged woman, her eyes bright, her face composed but not cold. She nodded for everyone to sit, then opened the file. "The Bennett case. Request for a restraining order." Her voice was even, like wind passing through an empty room. Frank's lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Frank Bennett, only wishes to ensure the safety of his daughter and young grandson. Every action he took stemmed from concern, not intent to threaten or harass." I looked at him. The man who once made me so afraid I held my breath every time the door opened, now stood in court, his tone half innocent, half moralizing. He spoke as if his entire life had been nothing but love, only occasionally misunderstood. I felt a strange stillness in my heart, no anger, no trembling, just one peculiar feeling. I was finally here, and I wasn't going back to the old place. Vanessa stood up. She walked to the lectern, holding her navy-colored file. She didn't need to look at the papers. "Your Honor," she began, "we have sufficient evidence to demonstrate that Mr. Frank Bennett's actions extended far beyond the boundary of a concerned father." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, every word anchoring into the floor of the room. She presented the evidence, the text messages, the photo of Leo's birthday cake with the 2 empty chairs, the police report documenting the night he pounded on the door and tried to use his key. Each piece of paper she placed on the table before the judge was soft, yet the sound echoed like falling metal. The judge examined each photo, each line of text. In one picture, Leo sat next to the birthday cake with the 2 empty chairs. I glanced at it, my heart contracting. That photo, which once brought me tears, was now legal proof of absence. Vanessa continued. Mr. Bennett repeatedly contacted my client despite requests to stop, appeared at Ms. Bennett's home, and called Child Protective Services with false information. All this demonstrates a pattern of behavior, control, emotional threat, and prolonged insecurity. Frank began to shake his head, his lips pursed, but he did not object. I noticed his eyes were no longer fierce, only tired and bewildered. Perhaps for the first time, he found himself in a place where his old authority meant nothing. Vanessa closed the file and returned to her seat. She looked at me, giving a slight nod, a look that said, "We've done our part." I exhaled, a short, dry sound, like finally reaching the end of a long climb. On the table, my glass of water remained untouched. I looked out the window, seeing the sunlight touching a distant rooftop and a gentle wind rustling the curtains. Even in the cold courtroom, I felt a small warmth ignite in my chest. I was hearing my own story, for the first time, in a public space where someone believed me. The judge was silent for a long time after Vanessa sat down. She turned back to the file, her eyes moving slowly across the pages as if weighing something heavier than paper, the gravity of the truth. The room was nearly silent save for the ticking of the wall clock and the held breaths of those waiting. Frank stood with his head bowed. My mother sat in the back row, gripping a white handkerchief, her eyes fixed on me, a look filled with a fear she couldn't name. I neither avoided nor sought her gaze. I just looked straight ahead, where the light from the window shone on the judge's bench, gently spreading like a patch of sky after the ice melts. She cleared her throat softly, then spoke, her voice strangely calm. The court has reviewed the evidence and testimony from both parties. The behavior of contact, surveillance, and causing distress by Mr. Frank Bennett toward his daughter, Ms. Clara Bennett, is verified as fact. No one breathed. She paused, looking directly at Frank, then continued. The court grants a restraining order for a period of 4 years. Mr. Bennett is prohibited from approaching the residence, workplace, or school of Leo Bennett. Violation will be prosecuted under law. Her voice wasn't raised, but it was clear, every word even and solid, like metal striking metal in the air. I heard the sentence not with my ears, but with my heart, each beat syncing up, steady, firm, rhythmic. Beside me, Vanessa nodded, quickly jotting something in her notebook. I couldn't read it, but I guessed it said, "Done." A chapter had truly closed. Behind me, my mother began to cry. The weeping was soft, choked, not violent, just sounds breaking free after years of suppression. I didn't turn around. I knew that in those tears there was not just sorrow, but fear, regret, and the realization that this time she couldn't save him, nor could she protect the silence any longer. I looked down at the small photo of Leo in my hand, the photo I had carried in my wallet since the first day I came here. My son's smile was bright, oblivious to the battle fought for his sake. I pressed my lips together and whispered softly, "Sweetheart, I did it." The judge placed her pen down, closing the file. Then she picked up the wooden gavel, raised it, and tapped gently. Just once. The sound was small, but it traveled far. It spread across the room, through the wooden panels, and echoed in my chest like a heartbeat. A heart that had just returned, after being suffocated for so many years. I neither smiled nor cried. I just sat still, my hand resting on my chest, feeling the warmth gradually spreading. Perhaps this was the feeling of true human justice, not winning, not losing, but being recognized that I had genuinely been harmed. Frank turned away, his posture heavy. My mother hurried after him, reaching for his hand, but he gently pulled away, not looking back. I remained seated. As they walked out of the room, a gentle breeze from the hallway swept in, carrying the scent of old wood and new paper, the smell of an ending. Vanessa placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Clara. Now you can breathe." I inhaled deeply. The air in the room suddenly felt different, light, real, and tasting of peace. Outside the window, the day was bright. Sunlight fell onto the stone steps where I was about to walk out. There were no shadows waiting by the gate anymore, only me and the new road, clean, long, glistening, as if it had just been wiped clean with old tears. The phone was silent. No text messages, no calls, no sound from the past attempting to intrude on my present. Just the rhythm of the clock and the wind whispering through the window cracks, blending with the scent of tea diffusing from the small porcelain teapot on the table. I never thought silence could feel so full like a room saturated with light. There were no more commanding voices, no more reproaches wrapped in the two words, "because we love you." There was just me, this kitchen, and the tea steam rising like thin smoke. I sat in the very room that used to hold my deepest fears. In the past, every time the phone rang, my heart would clench, as if I were a child facing an adult's anger. Now, the phone lay face down on the table, its screen dark, utterly still. It held no power anymore. I looked at it, and I smiled. Outside, the wind billowed the white curtain, making the edges sway gently, the sunlight catching the threads like silver silk. The scent of old wood and jasmine tea mingled, creating an atmosphere I had never dared to name. Peace. The door opened and Naomi stepped in, holding 2 paper bags from the bakery downstairs. "Blueberry muffins and coffee, just your taste," she said, placing them on the counter. Then she looked around and smiled. "It's so quiet, isn't it?" I nodded, pouring her a cup of tea. Naomi sat down, surveying the room, the light, the curtains, the stove, the wooden shelves. Everything was in its place, neat, nothing extra, nothing missing. She looked up and asked, "How do you feel?" I paused. The question sounded simple, yet it touched the zone of stillness I had just learned to protect. I didn't want to break it with long explanations. I took a sip of tea. The jasmine flavor was soothing, the heat spreading to my throat. Then I spoke softly, almost a whisper. "It's like I finally get to hear my own voice again." Naomi tilted her head, giving a small smile. "And what does that voice sound like?" I replied, my gaze drifting toward the window. "Light, no longer afraid. It doesn't need to ask permission to be at peace." She didn't say anything more, just gave a gentle nod. The light shone on the table, passing through the teacup, creating a shimmering stripe like a small river. We sat there, with no need to fill the void with words, because silence was no longer terrifying. It had become the reward. In that moment, I realized Silence is not the end of noise. It's the point when you are no longer bound by it. I looked at Naomi and offered a faint smile. It's like hearing my voice again, after muting all the static. The sentence came out so naturally that I was surprised myself, because for years I had only heard the voices of others, my father, my mother, my own fear. Now, in this stillness, my voice rang out, small, but clear enough to fill the entire kitchen. Naomi didn't reply, just watched me for a long time, then nodded. She stood up and patted my shoulder before leaving. "Keep it this quiet," she said. "I will. Quiet is the one thing I don't want to lose anymore." When the door closed, I sat alone, gently swirling the teacup. The last light of the day shone on the tabletop, warm gold like candlelight. On the shelf, the photo of Leo smiling brightly in the fields made me think that perhaps happiness is simply when you no longer wait for anyone to validate it. My phone vibrated softly on the table. One text message. The sender's name, Mom. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before opening it. "I'm sorry, but you have hurt the family." I read it one more time. Every word seemed coated in the sugar of affection, but inside was the same old needle, still reminding me that my mother's love always came tethered to guilt. I put the phone down and took a deep breath. No anger remained, nor sadness. Only a sense of distance, as if I were hearing the voice of someone standing outside a door I had locked shut. On the shelf, the small wooden box still sat there where I had placed my father's old key. I opened the lid. Inside, the afternoon light caught the tarnished metal, the rust gleaming in the sun. I picked it up. It felt cold and familiar. "No, Mom," I said softly, my voice sounding like a whisper blended with hot tea. "I didn't hurt anyone. I just opened the door for myself." The key felt weightless in my hand, as if it had never truly held any power. I was just the one who believed it did. Now it was just a small object, meaningless, except as a reminder that freedom requires no permission. I placed it back in the box, closing the lid, hearing the small click echo. A closing sound, but not to lock anyone out, but to keep the peace inside. I sat still, listening to the wind on the porch sighing through the window frame, light as the long breath of the house. No cars, no voices, nothing intruding. Just me, the room, and the authentic silence. I realized, my whole life I thought happiness was about being let in by someone. But it turns out, freedom begins the moment you dare to close a door and feel no need to ever open it again. I stood up and poured more tea. The steam rose, blurred, then vanished like the smoke of a wound that has finally healed. Outside, the sky changed color. There were no fireworks, no cheering, only the last light of the day drifting calmly through the curtain. The light I once thought I would never see again in peace. That morning, the kitchen smelled of chocolate cake. Leo ran around, his hands dusted with flour, laughing and saying, "Mom, I get to blow out 6 candles." I laughed and nodded. 6 candles, no more, no less. The light streamed in from the window, falling onto the golden balloons floating overhead. On the table, there were rows of orange paper cups, a few plates of cookies, and birthday hats tilted slightly. It wasn't luxurious or elaborate, but everything was in its right place. There was no knocking on the door, no one standing outside the fence. Only Leo's friends, the neighborhood kids, and the genuine sound of laughter. Round, crisp, and without a trace of apprehension. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching my son play with the children, my heart light as powdered sugar dissolving in hot tea. 6 years ago, on this very day, I sat alone in the delivery room. No one came, hearing only the monitor tracing my son's heartbeat. Now, this house was full of people, voices, and light. And I understood. Sometimes the most beautiful things happen when there is no one left to wait for. Leo ran up to me, holding a small camera. "Mom, let's take a picture." His voice rang out, clear as a silver bell. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped forward. "Okay, smile." He leaned against me, a smear of chocolate on his cheek, his smile so wide his eyes crinkled. I wrapped my arms around him, bending my head down. His hair smelled like sunshine. The camera clicked, a simple sound that I had never valued so much. The picture appeared on the camera screen. 2 people, genuine smiles, real light. No one was cropped out of the frame, no empty chairs, no averted gazes. Just me, and the child who helped me relearn how to love myself. Leo looked at the photo and cheered. "It's beautiful! Mom, your smile looks like sunshine." I chuckled. "Like sunshine? You exaggerate. It is sunshine. I see it." He tilted the camera for me to see, then said seriously, "Mom, I'm so happy today. I can hear real laughter in our home." I gently touched his shoulder, my voice catching with something both warm and painful. "Yes, me too." Naomi arrived carrying a tray of warm cupcakes, her hair neatly tied back, her cheeks slightly flushed. "This house is as happy as a Disney movie," she said, setting the tray down. I smiled. Yes, but no prince. Just 2 ordinary people who know how to mix flour and believe in the light. Naomi shrugged. "That's even better." The children rushed over, singing "Happy Birthday" loudly. Leo smiled shyly, then blew out the candles one by one. I took continuous pictures, afraid the moment would vanish too quickly. After the children left, the house was left only with the sound of balloons bumping the ceiling and the scent of chocolate frosting lingering on napkins. I sat down, looking around. The table was messy, crumbs scattered, but the room was beautiful in the way of a day fully lived. On the table, the small camera was still on. The last photo displayed. 2 faces, Leo and me. A true smile, real light. No need for edits or filters, just life, simple and in its true colors. I touched the screen, whispering to myself. Finally, I see myself. Not through anyone else's mirror, but in this child's eyes. After all the children had gone home, the house returned to its most peaceful state, a kind of warmth that wasn't empty, but full of life. On the floor, balloons slowly deflated, candies were scattered, and the scent of chocolate still lingered in the air. I was clearing the table when Leo ran back, holding a piece of colored paper, his eyes shining as if he had found treasure. "Mom, I finished my drawing." I wiped my hands and bent down. On the paper was a small yellow house, a red roof, a white fence, and a window pouring out light. 2 figures stood on the porch, one tall, one short. I recognized my short brown hair and my son's round smile. No one else. I asked, softly, but my heart gave a little tremor. "No grandma or grandpa, honey?" Leo looked up, without hesitation. "I don't need them, Mom. I have enough with just you." The answer came as naturally as a breath. No resentment, no sadness, just the simplest truth, spoken in the voice of a child who had never learned to hide what he felt. I was silent. For a moment, I wanted to say something to excuse the past, that his grandparents still loved him in their own way, that everything would be okay. But I didn't say it, because sometimes Silence is the way we honor the truth. I sat next to him, gently stroking the edge of the paper. Our house is beautiful, I said. What do you think if Mom frames this drawing and hangs it in the living room? Leo nodded, his eyes sparkling. Hang it right next to the picture of you smiling, okay? I smiled, feeling a warmth spread slowly in my heart, not loud like cheers, but quietly, like a thin breeze sliding past the heart. I placed the drawing on the table, where the amber light of the afternoon was setting. The sunlight streamed through the window frame, bathing my son's face, then spreading to me. The two figures, small and large, blended into a soft stripe of light, as if time itself was gently smiling. I looked at my son and whispered, "Thank you, Leo. Because of you, I know what is enough." The boy smiled, not fully understanding, but nodding as if he grasped a part of it with his heart. I reached out and touched his hair, my heart suddenly feeling cleansed. In my mind, old scenes flashed back, the knocking, the key turning, the harsh voices, the constant fear. Now, all of it melted away, leaving only the light, the smell of cake, and my son's laughter echoing in the home I had reclaimed. The final amber light of the day covered the walls, glistening through the glass. I looked around. Every object was settled, every breath was warm. There was no shadow outside the door, no one holding a key anymore. I smiled and whispered, not necessarily for him to hear, but for myself. Sometimes, peace only comes when we stop counting the people who left. Leo leaned his head on my shoulder, giving a small yawn. I held him, listening to his small heart beating steadily, blending with the breathing of the house. Outside the window, the light slowly turned honey-colored, the color of true peace. A late autumn afternoon, I sat by Reed Lake, where the surface of the water was still as a mirror, reflecting the orange sunset slowly dipping behind the distant fir trees. The wind carried the smell of dry leaves, damp earth, and a hint of cinnamon from the cafe across the shore. Everything was so quiet, I could distinctly hear the sound of a bird's wing brushing the water. Just a faint sound, then gone. In my hand was the old key, the one that had lain in the wooden box for months, cold, rusted, but still heavy, not because of the metal, but because of the memory it carried. I flipped it back and forth between my fingers. The sunset light reflected off the patchy iron, creating a bright spot like a small scar on time. For years, I was terrified of the sound of a key turning. That sound used to be a warning. It signaled a raised voice, scrutiny, and nights I had to hold my breath when I heard the door open. It was the sound of authority, of discipline, of someone else deciding how I was allowed to breathe in my own home. I looked at the key lying still in my hand and smiled. I used to be afraid of the key turning. Not anymore. The wind blew gently, sweeping through my hair, lifting a few new silver strands. I gently tilted my head, watching the lake surface shimmer with a golden light, a soft glow like the last breath of the day. I thought of Leo, of our small house, of the lingering scent of chocolate on the dishcloth, and felt my heart warm as if I had just brewed a pot of tea on a chilly winter evening. There was nothing left to forgive and nothing left to return. All I wanted was to simply put it down. I clenched the key, feeling the coldness bite into my skin, a sensation so real it made my heart contract, then expand. A part of me once belonged to this fear. Now that very part was dissolving, little by little, like the sunset merging with the water. I heard small footsteps behind me. Leo. He was holding a round stone and said, "I found this. Isn't it pretty, Mom?" "It is," I said, "but I have something even older." I opened my hand, showing him the key. Leo touched it, frowning. It's cold. I smiled. Yes, because it lived in the dark. Now it's going to its right place. He looked at me, asked no more, just stood beside me, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the water, slowly turning a deep honey color. The light reflected on his cheek, warm, innocent, just like the day I first held him. I knew I had reached the end of the road I needed to travel, not to forget, but to remember without the pain. Like the lake surface, once rippled, now still, reflecting only the calm sky. I gently squeezed my hand, hearing the key graze my skin. A small, dry, real sound. A chapter of life had closed, marked by this very sound. Leo stood next to me, his bright eyes reflecting the honey-gold lake. He looked at the key in my hand, tilting his head slightly. Because now only your key matters, right? I offered a small laugh. Yes, only my key matters now, and I won't let anyone else hold it. Leo nodded, as if understanding, then bent down to pick up a small pebble and threw it far out. The stone hit the water, creating several circular ripples that spread and then vanished, exactly like the time I had lived, endured, and allowed others to turn my life in circles. I held the key in the palm of my hand. It was cold, heavy, but it no longer terrified me. I whispered softly, just loud enough for myself to hear. You know, Leo, some things you have to let go of so your hands can be light. The boy stayed silent, his eyes still following the water, waiting. I inhaled deeply, lifting my hand over the wooden railing, my palm slowly opening. The sunset light touched the surface of the key, flashing a brief, bright stripe before fading. The key fell. It pierced the clear surface of the water, making a sound almost inaudible, just a small sigh of freedom. The ripples spread out, circle after circle, then disappeared, leaving the lake flat as a fresh sheet of paper. I watched until I saw nothing but the orange-gold color spreading across the water. The feeling in my chest was strangely light, as if an invisible thread that had bound me for years had just been removed. Leo looked up at me. Is it all done now, Mom? It's done, son. I took his hand and walked a few steps along the lakeshore. The wind gently rustled the trees behind us, the leaves making a soft sound, like someone very quietly applauding a peaceful ending. The sky darkened faster than I expected. The last rays of light retreated toward the horizon, leaving a deep indigo embracing the entire lake. Leo squeezed my hand, his voice tiny. I like the sound the water makes when we throw rocks more. I smiled. I like another sound even more. What sound? I tilted my head, listening for a moment, then replied, the click. Leo looked puzzled. What click, Mom? I looked out at the lake, my voice soft as the wind. The sound of the lock that night. The first sound I heard that no longer felt like fear. I gently placed my hand on my chest, feeling my heart beat, steady, firm, no longer panicked. That sound was still there, within me. Click. Not the sound of being trapped, but the sound of being opened. Sometimes, freedom doesn't require cheering or brilliant light. It's just the moment you realize you are no longer waiting for anyone but yourself. I bent down and kissed my son's hair. Leo looked up and smiled. Let's go home, Mom. It's getting dark. I nodded. The two of us walked away, our shadows lengthening on the path, blending into the lingering twilight. Behind us, the lake remained still. No key, no past. Only the ripples that had vanished, and the small click. The sound that still echoed in my heart. the sound of freedom. Some wounds don't need anyone to heal them. They only need time, and a silence long enough for us to finally hear the sound of our own hearts resurrecting. I used to think freedom was a door opening onto another world. Now I understand it's just a small click, echoing in the night, when we finally dare to close the door that held our fear for too long. Today, I no longer wait for anyone to knock. I no longer worry about who holds the key. This house, this life, they both carry my name written in lines of ink that need no further proof. Leo grows older every day, and I know there will be a time he wants to leave, to find his own sky. But when that day comes, I will smile, because I've taught him the only lesson that took me half a lifetime to learn. No one can take your freedom away, unless you hand them the key yourself. The last light of the day touches the doorframe. I sit still, listening to the wind, and I know I am home. If you too have had to learn how to stand up, if you've had to close a door to keep your own peace, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be kept alive, subscribe to the channel so we can hold on to each other in those small clicks of courage.